My beloved child. Pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was not placed before you to fill your heart with fear. It was placed here to awaken your discernment. Do not rush past these words. Do not allow the unsettling title of this message to make your imagination run toward the darkest conclusion. Something has been spoken about you in this fictional story, something has been written down, and someone believed that placing your name before an authority would give their assumptions the appearance of truth. But heaven has seen the beginning of this matter, the hidden conversations behind it, and the detail that changes everything. The report did not begin with evidence. It began with observation twisted by suspicion. A curtain moving at an unusual hour. A light left on when the rest of the street was dark. A visitor whose face they did not recognize. A box carried through your doorway. A moment of silence they could not explain. Ordinary details were gathered like scattered pieces of glass, and someone tried to arrange them into a frightening picture. They claimed you had been hiding something. They claimed your routines had changed. They claimed strange activity had been taking place around you. But the chilling part was not what they saw. It was how confidently they described what they had never truly understood. Listen carefully, because there is a reason this message has reached you now. In this story, the accusation sounds serious when it is first repeated. It creates an uncomfortable silence in a room where your name is being discussed. One person looks down at the report. Another asks whether anyone has spoken directly to you. And that question, simple, calm, almost easy to overlook, becomes the first crack in the entire narrative. Because no one had asked you. No one had knocked on your door with honesty. No one had looked into your eyes and said, "This is what we think we saw. Can you explain it?" They chose whispers before conversation, conclusions before clarity, and suspicion before compassion. Do not skip what comes next, because the person who submitted the report did not act alone. Another neighbor had been drawn into the discussion, not because they had witnessed anything alarming, but because they had heard a version of events repeated so often that uncertainty began to feel like confirmation. This is how a rumor gathers weight. One person says, "I noticed something." Another replies, "I thought it was strange too." Soon, neither remembers where the original concern ended and the shared imagination began. Yet there was someone else nearby who heard these conversations and remained silent. Not because they agreed, but because something in their spirit told them the story did not fit the person they had quietly observed you to be. They remembered the days you showed kindness when no one was watching. They remembered the package you carried inside was delivered to the wrong address and later returned. They remembered the unknown visitor was someone who needed help. They remembered that the light left burning late into the night was not proof of a hidden act, it was the sign of a heart trying to finish something important while the world slept. This silent witness becomes more important than anyone realizes. My child, remain calm as the story unfolds. The authority receiving the complaint does not immediately treat suspicion as guilt. The report is documented because that is what procedure requires, but documentation is not condemnation. Questions may be asked, but questions are not verdicts. A person may look into a concern without believing every word that was written. And this distinction matters, because fear will try to convince you that once your name has been mentioned, everything is already decided. But truth does not lose its voice merely because a lie arrived first. The neighbor claimed you had been receiving secret deliveries. They claimed people came and left at unusual times. They claimed sounds had been heard through the walls. They claimed you appeared nervous whenever you noticed someone watching. Each statement was written in a way that made normal human behavior sound sinister. A closed door became concealment. Privacy became secrecy. Tiredness became guilt. Your choice not to engage with gossip became evidence that you had something to hide. But there was one detail they could not explain. Every time they claimed something unusual had happened, another record quietly existed. A delivery confirmation. A message. A timestamp. A maintenance notice. A simple, reasonable fact. Nothing dramatic. Nothing designed for defense. Just truth leaving small footprints before anyone knew those footprints would matter. Heaven had not erased the misunderstanding before it happened, but in this fictional tale, protection was already woven into the ordinary moments surrounding you. Stay with this message, because the story becomes deeper here. The complaint was not truly born from one evening. It had roots in an earlier moment, an exchange so small you may not have considered it meaningful. Perhaps you declined an invitation. Perhaps you did not respond to a question. Perhaps you set a boundary someone disliked. Perhaps you stopped sharing personal details with people who had become too interested in your life. You did nothing cruel, but your distance offended someone who believed access to you was their right. After that, they began interpreting everything through the lens of rejection. When you smiled, they thought you were pretending. When you remained quiet, they thought you were plotting. When you improved your surroundings, they wondered where the change had come from. When you went through a difficult season, they watched for weakness instead of offering support. They did not understand that your silence was healing, that your boundaries were protection, and that the changes they noticed were part of an inner rebuilding no outsider could easily see. This is why discernment is necessary. Not every person who watches you understands you. Not every person who speaks confidently possesses the truth. And not every report is the final word. The atmosphere changes when the silent witness finally decides to speak. They do not arrive with dramatic accusations. They do not attack the neighbor who made the complaint. They simply say, "There may be another explanation." Those words shift the entire room. The authority looks up. The papers are reviewed again. Questions are asked with greater care. The claims that once sounded chilling begin to reveal gaps. One alleged secret visitor had entered openly through the front door in full view of the street. One so-called suspicious delivery had a company label clearly visible. One late-night sound had occurred during scheduled repairs. One moment described as you hiding something had been nothing more than you moving personal belongings away from rain. But the neighbor had omitted these details. Why? That question enters the room and does not leave. The person reviewing the report notices that every neutral detail has been removed, leaving only language that invites fear. Unknown person, instead of delivery worker. Repeated disturbance, instead of 2 separate repair visits. Avoided eye contact, instead of walked inside while carrying bags. The complaint was not only a record of events. It was a story carefully shaped to produce a reaction. Do not become afraid, my child. Become aware. In this fictional message, awareness is not paranoia. It is the ability to remain anchored while others attempt to define what your life means from a distance. You do not need to confront every whisper. You do not need to prove yourself to every curious eye. But when something reaches an official space, calm truth becomes more powerful than emotional reaction. There is a temptation in moments like this to knock on doors, demand answers, and release every feeling at once. But heaven's wisdom says, slow down. Breathe. Preserve what is true. Speak only what you know. Do not add assumptions to assumptions. Do not let someone else's exaggeration provoke you into behavior that can be misunderstood. The strongest response is not the loudest response. It is the clearest. And clarity is coming. The authority asks whether the complainant has photographs, recordings, dates, or any direct evidence of wrongdoing. There is hesitation. A folder is opened. Several images are produced, but they show very little. A shadow. A vehicle. A covered box. A person standing near a gate. None proves the claims attached to them. The images feel unsettling only because of the words used to describe them. Then one photograph catches the reviewer's attention. It was taken from an angle that reveals more than the neighbor intended. In the corner of the image is a reflection. Faint, but visible. It shows the person taking the picture was not standing casually on their own property. They had moved closer. Much closer. Close enough to raise a different concern. The focus of the inquiry begins to shift. Not as revenge, not as punishment, but because truth has a way of turning the light toward what has been hidden. The neighbor had presented themselves as a frightened observer. But the image suggested deliberate watching. Another timestamp showed they had been documenting your movements over several days. Suddenly, the question was no longer only, what was happening at your home? It became, why was this person so determined to create a record of you? That is when the silent witness remembers something else. Weeks earlier, the neighbor had asked them questions about your schedule. When you usually left. Whether you lived alone. Who visited you. Whether you had recently received money. At the time, the questions had seemed like ordinary curiosity. Now they carried a different weight. The witness had not answered most of them, sensing the conversation was crossing a boundary. The room becomes quiet again. Do not misread this silence. It is not the silence of people believing the accusation. It is the silence of people realizing they may have been guided toward a false conclusion. It is the pause that occurs when a carefully constructed story begins to collapse under the weight of one overlooked detail. Yet there is still more. The neighbor had claimed they reported you because they were concerned for the safety of the community. But the witness remembers hearing them say something else in private. They think they can ignore me. Those words reveal the emotional root beneath the official language. This was not only about concern. It was about wounded pride. Someone had taken your boundary personally, and instead of respecting it, they searched for a way to regain influence over your life. The deepest danger was never the report itself. It was the belief that your silence could be interpreted however they wished. But they did not expect your silence to be surrounded by truth. They did not expect the ordinary records. They did not expect the witness. They did not expect their own photograph to reveal their position. And they certainly did not expect one person within the authorities' office to recognize the pattern in the wording of the complaint. The language sounded familiar. Another report had been filed months earlier about someone else in the neighborhood. Different name. Similar phrases. Similar claims of unusual behavior. Similar lack of direct evidence. That report had also come from the same person. Now the matter becomes larger than your story. The earlier neighbor had eventually moved away, believing the tension would never end. They had never known a second person might one day face the same pattern. Their complaint file had been closed without action, but a note remained. Concerns appeared to be based primarily on personal conflict and speculation. When this note is placed beside the report about you, the chilling details lose their power. A pattern emerges, but not the pattern the complainant intended to expose. My beloved child, this is the moment where your inner strength is tested. Even when truth begins turning in your favor, do not celebrate another person's humiliation. Do not hunger for revenge. You are being protected, not invited to become cruel. Pray for wisdom. Maintain boundaries. Let proper processes handle what belongs to them. The victory of truth is not the destruction of a person. It is the ending of deception. The authority may contact you. In this fictional narrative, the conversation is calm. They do not arrive as an enemy. They ask simple questions. They explain that a concern was raised and that clarification is needed. Your heart beats faster at first, because hearing that someone has reported you feels deeply personal. But you remember the guidance. Answer honestly, remain composed, and do not guess at motives. You explain the visitor. You explain the deliveries. You explain the sounds. You provide only what is relevant. Each answer fits the records already available. Nothing feels forced because nothing has been invented. Truth does not need dramatic decoration. Then you are asked whether you have had a dispute with the neighbor. You pause. There had been no argument. No shouting. No threat. Only a boundary. You had asked them not to enter your space without permission. You had stopped answering intrusive questions. You had chosen distance after noticing they repeated private matters to others. The person taking your statement writes this down. A boundary, they realize, may have been the beginning of the retaliation. But before the meeting ends, you are shown one sentence from the report. A sentence so bold that even you struggle to understand how someone could write it without proof. They claimed you had been preparing for something that could affect everyone nearby. The words were deliberately vague, frightening enough to trigger concern but empty enough to avoid naming a specific act. You ask what they believed you were preparing. No clear answer had been provided. This is significant. The most chilling claim was also the least supported. It was built entirely from suggestion. A phrase designed to allow the reader's imagination to create what evidence could not. The authority recognizes this. And yet, just as relief begins to settle over you, something unexpected happens. A second document is placed on the table. It did not come from the same neighbor. It was submitted anonymously one day after the first report. For a moment, the room feels colder. Had another person joined them? Had the rumor spread farther than anyone knew? Was someone else watching? The anonymous note repeats one detail from the original complaint, but then it adds a sentence that changes the meaning entirely. The person being reported may not be the one creating the disturbance. Please check who has been entering the shared area after midnight. The second report was not accusing you. It was warning the authorities that someone may have been trying to make activity near your home look as though it belonged to you. Security records are requested. A camera covering the edge of the street had captured movement on 3 of the nights mentioned in the complaint. At first the footage appears ordinary: dim lights, parked vehicles, tree branches moving in the wind. Then, shortly after midnight, a figure enters the frame. They walk toward the shared area beside your property. They remain there for several minutes. They place something out of sight. Before leaving, they turn toward the camera. The image is unclear, but the coat, the posture, and the distinctive way the person walks cause the silent witness to inhale sharply. They recognize the figure. And when the footage is advanced to the following night, the same person returns, this time carrying the exact object that the neighbor later claimed belonged to you. The room goes completely silent as the investigator freezes the frame, enlarges the image, and asks the one question no one expected to hear. Why does the person in this footage appear to be the same person who filed the report?